Welcome to Chronicles, Crown of Thorns, and we're following Jesus on his road to the cross, and we're now in Mark chapter 2, and this is one of the most famous stories in Mark's Gospel, where Jesus reveals who he really is and what he's come to do. This is verse 1 of chapter 2. A few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralysed man carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus by digging through it, and then lowered the mat the man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralysed man, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some teachers of the law were sitting there thinking to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts, and he said to them, "Why are you thinking these things? Which is easier, to say to this paralysed man, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, take your mat and walk'? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." So he said to the man, "I tell you, get up, take your mat and go home." He got up, took his mat, and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this."
This is one of the classic sort of stories they read at Sunday school, isn't it? And quite
Yeah,
rightly,
rightly so,
because it's just a fantastic story.
Yeah.
Because you've got every ingredient for good stuff, haven't you? You've got a crowded house, absolutely packed out. You know, no one else can get in. But here's a group of mates bringing their paralysed mate. I mean, whether he wanted to go or not, we don't know. But they're carrying him. They can't get in, so they dig a hole in the roof. And it's just that classic scene where you can imagine inside the house, Jesus is speaking, and then there's crumbling on the wall and bits of dust falling down, and everybody's going, "What's going on? And is there an earthquake or something?" And then suddenly this bloke is lowered down who's paralysed. And I always think, does he want to be there? But his mates want him there.
Yeah.
And then you've got this, on an initial reading, an extraordinarily disappointing sentence from Jesus.
Yes.
Because we know that he has the power of God to heal people, and presumably they're carrying him there to be healed.
Yeah.
And he says to the man on the mat, "Son, your sins are forgiven."
Yeah.
And you think, great.
Yeah. I know, it's like going to the dentist, isn't it, with a throbbing tooth and a hole in your molar, and him saying, "Your sins are forgiven." You think, well, that's lovely, but it's not what I think.
No, exactly.
I've come to have my tooth fixed, and yet Jesus is showing us here that this man, although extremely needy in the physical realm, has an even greater need. And it's what we saw with the leper as well. The cleansing and the forgiveness of sin is our most pressing issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
No matter what our physical state in this life, whether we're disabled or abled or strong or weak, we are all born cut off from God, and that to be reconciled to God is our most pressing and urgent need. And Jesus is very affectionate, calling him son already. It's a very you don't get the impression that he's irritated or frustrated by this interruption. He's going to use it as an opportunity to show that only he can cure our most important needs, the forgiveness of sins.
Yeah, and that is the most important thing, because you can be healed, as this man is going to be.
Yes.
But you'll die again anyway. Yeah. You can have your legs, but they're going to fail in the end. Yeah. But the main thing for eternity is that you're right with the living God, and in order to be right with the living God and enter into fellowship with the living God, you need your sins forgiven. So yes, absolutely. So we get this, and then of course the teachers of the law, the religious people, are listening in, and they're right. Because they say, "Hold it, what? Who can forgive sins but God?" This has got to be blasphemy, hasn't it? Because how can anyone really forgive sins other than God? So what's going on there, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think, as you say, they are right, and Jesus knows what they're saying, and that is exactly the point, isn't it? That Jesus would agree with that sentence. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Yeah, no one. Only God has the authority to forgive sins. And therefore, in claiming the ability to do that, Jesus is claiming to be God himself.
Yeah.
And this is just a great, I don't know whether people are listening in from other faiths or religions, but this is a great passage to go to show the divinity of Jesus, that he was God. Everybody knew that to claim to be able to forgive sins was a reserved for God alone. Jesus knew that, and yet he claims it here, to be God himself who can forgive sins.
And he says of himself here in verse 10, which is, I think, the first use, well, it is the first use in Mark so far. His favourite title for himself, Jesus, is that he talks about in verse 10 that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. And that term, Son of Man, has strong meaning when you go to the Old Testament part of the Bible, and particularly something like Daniel 7 in the Old Testament, where it shows that the Son of Man is God's person, God's right-hand person, on the same level as God, and is given authority over all the universe.
Yeah.
And part of his authority is being able to deal with sin.
Yeah, and that his authority has been one of the great themes of chapter 1, because back in verse 27, when Jesus cast out an impure spirit, the crowd's response was, "What is this? A new teaching and with authority?" In other words, it's not like the other teachings that we've heard, which are quite interesting and wordy but lack power. Here's someone who says something and it happens. There's authority here, and that's what Jesus is showing at the end here. I want you to know that I have authority to forgive sins. So he says to the man, "Get up, take your mat and go home." He got up, took his mat and walked out. In other words, if Jesus has got the authority to heal this man physically with a word, then when he says your sins are forgiven, that word carries the exact same authority. He can pronounce healing and he can pronounce forgiveness. And that is the main thing. He doesn't say, "I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to heal the paralysed." That is part of what he's come to do, but it's not the emphasis. The emphasis is, I want you to know that I am the one who can forgive sins. And
so the healing, in a sense, is a witness and a sermon toward what he's going to do.
Yeah.
So actually, we need to say to people, if you know you're a sinner, don't stay there. There's one who has authority to forgive sins, and that's Jesus.